This is what the purists will tell you all the time. Do not scale, because scaling hurts. Many more people will hurt just because of what I just told you about on the screen before. Do not scale. This is one of the things that people will always tell you. That's very purist and not realistic in all senses, but there are some strategies that you can follow if you really want to scale as little as possible. And this is, of course, one of the things is you could just take longer. If you have the luxury to be able to take longer, then it will be cheaper in effect, because you will need less people. This is not a hard and fast number here, but if 9 people take 12 months, if you double it, you will not do it in 6 months. You will not do it in 6 months with 18 people. It will take longer than 6 months, so 7, 8 months. You're still finished earlier, but in the end, it will be more expensive. So if you have the luxury to weigh it out, to say, okay, we'll deliver a little later, then really just don't scale. Just stay in small, just take longer. It will be actually cheaper and possibly even better because of less coordination necessities or less communication errors that will occur. Quality might actually increase even too. Okay, so that's one possibility, And if you have a customer, then agility helps you with creating intermediate results, with creating deliverables. If you do it well, you will have code, you will have software that you can deliver already. So you have the ability to satisfy, show progress, satisfy the customer with something that he can already possibly even use. So sometimes that is actually a possibility, and it's something worth thinking about. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't always work, because time is very often of the essence, and you just want to spend more money and go through the effort of this whole scaling, but sometimes you don't need to, and then don't scale. Don't do it. And the second thing is, of course, is splitting it up into really totally independent products or projects. And then you have more people, but they really, really work on their own. They do not have dependencies and communications and whatever with the others. If you can do that too, and sometimes this has an effect on your strategy, on your vision for a product possibly, has an effect of what you have to talk with your customer about and how to say, okay, let's do 2 projects instead of 1, and this one does this and this one does this, but keep them entirely independent, or as independent as anyhow possible. And this is sometimes, I know, especially German engineers find that almost unacceptable, but you could just say, I don't care what the other people do, I'll just do my thing. And any synergy and any reusable code and everything, forget it. I'm not going to build anything that the others can use. I'm just going to build my thing, and they're going to build their thing, and it might be totally different. Maybe we have, for the look and feel, we have some style guides so that our 2 solutions look the same, but underneath the hood, totally different. And we do not have any synergies, any reuse. And the thing is, you might work better with that, because in the end, you will work faster and you have this independence. You do not have this whole communication and dependency problem when you do that. That is one thing that one has to think about. It's very tough. I know it myself. You always think, oh, yeah, of course, we need to have some basic module, some basic component that we all can share and everything. But the moment you do this, you introduce many, many more dependencies. You introduce, people have to wait for this, and then and there's, of course, much more of a communication need between the teams that will use the same component. So maybe do not try for synergies and share code components, and minimize very stable interfaces that you don't change. Something like this. So all of these are strategies that one can use to not scale. So when I say scale agility, how does it work? Concepts, one of the concepts, don't scale. Try to, before you start scaling, think about these things and say, cannot possibly avoid it. Because it hurts. In the end, it hurts, and if we can avoid it, better. Sometimes you cannot avoid it. You have coordinated deliveries, you have unavoidable dependencies. It just doesn't work. You need to really scale. That does happen, okay? And Agile is more and more popular. We all know it. Lots of people say we need to do Agile now, even though they don't know why. They just say everybody talks about it, so let's do Agile. So everybody wants to do Agile, clear. But then the big companies come in, the big projects come in, we want to do it, so everybody needs to scale also, because they're used to scaling, because they have Microsoft project sheets that cover whole walls and everything with huge dependency graphs, Gantt charts and everything, and now they want to do the same thing, just Agile. They want to say, okay, we'll do it with backlog and task boards and whatever, but we still have those 50, 100, 150 people there, and we want to run them Agile with our product. And if you want to do this, you need to think about it very hard. And lots of people started and said, okay, maybe we can do this. There's the famous for Scrum, the SOS, Scrum of Scrums. People use that, and so on. And there's lots of self-made, do-it-yourself scaling that happened in the beginning. But the more popular it got, the more people said, oh, maybe I can make some money out of it. I mean, that's not nice. They also want to offer solutions, of course. They see there is a problem, we need to offer solutions for it, and maybe we can make some money out of it. So what happens, several solutions come up, people show them, and people give their opinion, and everybody says, well, this is real bad, this is a good one. And so the scaling wars started. I do not know how much you've heard of this and everything, but there is really lots of different opinions on it, and my oh my, you can go to conferences about agility, and they, you know, you have to be careful that they don't start getting violent with each other, and you know, it's really very strong opinions about this. And this is something that just happened. So now, what I want to show you is a couple of these frameworks, concepts, ideas, and what they do. Currently, the lead is SAFe. I don't know, have you heard of SAFe? Anybody know SAFe? SAFe is a relatively famous concept, and I think at least 40% of all scaling frameworks that are used, if not more, are SAFe now. And especially because the big companies like it. You go to Bahn, you go to, I don't know, I was at Conti not too long ago, you know, these DAX size, big companies, SAFe, they love it. It helps them a lot, and I will get there. Less is another one that we'll talk about in a moment, and then there are a couple of them that are much, much less used, and there are even more, but I didn't put them on here, also out of time constraints and whatever. But we'll touch on these four briefly for the rest of the time, and then hopefully we're done in time. So SAFe, very easy, obviously. So, okay, that's SAFe. Okay, just take a minute and we're done. All right. And the funny thing is, because it looks like this, lots of people love it, in my opinion. You know, because it's exactly what they're used to. This gets people into a comfort zone instead of out of a comfort zone. I mean, of course they don't understand it, but they realize, wow, this has all kinds of ideas and all kinds of things and everything. So this is like what we are used to when we did waterfall, with all kinds of rational this and that and here and there and blah blah. And that's what happens. And Bahn or Conti, they love this. They love this, you know. And so what are the key concepts? The scalability is huge. I mean, you can have projects or sub-organizations with hundreds and hundreds of people, and that would still fit in there. It touches the whole organization. This is a hierarchical structure. There are four levels: the team level, the program level, the value stream level, and the portfolio level. So the strategy and everything on the portfolio, most people don't use, in my opinion. I think this is there, they talk about it, but I think this is very infrequently used. The value stream also only if you have very, very large projects that have more than 150 people. This is the most common thing that SAFe brings to the projects, to the enterprises. This is the Agile release train. Some of you might have heard that. And this basically, the idea is that you have teams. The teams can do Scrum and Kanban, and the teams up to 150 people are together in one release train. And this release train is basically an organization on top with a product manager or program manager, with a release train engineer, so new roles. The release train engineer is basically the Scrum Master for all 150 people. And, you know, we have, you know, the lean Agile leaders or masters or something like this that are working together, like we do it here too in certain projects. And the release train engineer sort of, it's not the boss, but he has a responsibility for processes and scheduling and everything here. And we also have a hierarchy of requirements. You know, we have the epics. On the next level, we have capabilities. Then we have features, and then down to the user stories. Enablers is something else. These are the technical infrastructure type of stories that come down the same. They don't, for whatever reason, they don't rename them. They are enablers all through, but they're big and small. Core things that so new roles, new artifacts, and new meetings. And one of the big things that you do have is they suggest you generally have 2-week sprints It doesn't have to be, but generally 2 week sprints, very popular anyway. We like it here too, as a matter of fact, we know. And they must be coordinated across all teams. And then you have program increment, which is generally around about 5 or 6 sprints or iterations. Kanban, we wouldn't call them sprints. But you have 5 to 6 iterations, and so you have 10 to 12 weeks for a product increment. And program increment, and then you do a sort of what's called the PI planning at the beginning of this program increment, and you get everybody together, all 150 people if necessary, for 2 days, and you plan the next 6 sprints. And you don't plan them in detail, you think more about goals, objectives, and everything, so on a higher level, but you really kind of plan. And that, of course, is always something where it's, how agile is this really? And this is one of the big problems that lots of people have with this PI planning. The author, Dean Leffingwell, says, you can change all kinds of things here, but if you don't do PI planning, you're not doing safe. That's what he always says. But at the same time, PI planning is exactly that, where you say, I plan for the next 10 to 12 weeks. And how agile is this really when you start planning for 10 to 12 weeks, even on a higher level? Because what I don't see too easily is how, if your objectives change within these 10 to 12 weeks, how do you deal with this is not quite clear. And that's a little bit of a problem in there. They also say develop on cadence. In other words, you have the 2 week iterations and the 10 or 12 week program increments, PIs, but you can release anytime. So you need to be able to release anytime. This is another thing that, in my opinion, most people don't do. They always see it as this big thing, and this is my release moment. We integrate and everything. And the last interesting thing about it is that the last sprint of those 5 or 6, is called the Innovation and Planning Sprint, INP. And that really is actually a sprint where you don't do any concrete work from the backlogs, but you actually do stuff like you do on a hackathon maybe, but you also do all your reviews and retros for the PI level reviews and retros, and the planning. The PI planning is part of this and everything. Plus a couple of days other things, clean up and whatever it is. That's the idea always. Okay? So roughly the characteristics, Dean Leffingwell, you have to realize he also comes from Rational, so very much a different line that he originally came from. He's not the original Agile guru. He comes from a different side. It's very prescriptive. People like that about it, but it has lots of detail, as books and courses, and you can be certified, safe, whatever, and so on and so on. So it's very prescriptive, even though everybody says, oh, you can change and modify, and you need to change and modify. The beauty of it is, for most people, is how exact and how detailed it is. And that's really one of the things that people like. And if they have a hierarchical organization, they like the hierarchical structure of SAFe also. So that's one of the things, and it impacts the entire organization to a large part. Everything in it framework, best suited for large enterprises. Okay, less is has one or many differences. First of all, they say less usually is only for up to 8 teams. They have now less huge, that then puts a little bit of a hierarchy on top of it because they needed it. But I'll stick with less also for time considerations. I need to be done in a few minutes. But less has lots, and it's only for Scrum. In fact, large-scale Scrum. And what less does is actually, it really says, still, even though we might have up to 8 teams, we have one PO. One PO, because it's one product or one project, one PO. That's it. Tough. I don't want to be that PO, maybe. the fact is what you need to learn then, and this is the difficult part, and this is an interesting part, and that's why the more purist Scrum folks prefer this. You need to get lots of the work that the PO would normally do on a team level into the team. The team will write the user stories, not the PO. The PO gives general direction, but the team writes the user stories. That's the idea here, because obviously you cannot write user stories for all 8 teams. I mean, if you have a 2-week sprint, then you'll be busy 2 weeks just writing user stories and nothing else. But you need to talk to your customer, or you need to look at the market, you need to do many, many other things, not just writing user stories, obviously. You need to look at the results, and so on and so on. So the PO, the one PO that is there, will delegate much to the teams. That is the interesting idea here. That one has to be clear about. If you have 2 teams, fine. This also gives much more of a natural, you can grow, second team, third team, not a problem. You still have one PO, just that the teams need to do a little bit more PO work then. That's what happens. And you have the typical things, sprint planning too, you have sprint review, retrospectives, all of those things, no, not the sprint review, sorry. Some of those things are done on team level, as you can see here with those lines, they're done on team level, but the sprint planning one, they say bring everybody together. Plan together. Teams say, oh, we'll take this story, and so on and so on. So do the sprint planning together and do the review together. Like we do every, I don't know, for 5 sprints or so, we have a joint review, the marketplace type of thing. Here they do this every time, every sprint. Do the review together, all teams together. And do this planning 1, so what do we do together? Planning 2, how do we do it in detail, possibly writing even some stories right then, happens in the teams. The teams do their own retrospective, but then they send one person into an overall retrospective so that we learn also from the whole thing. So here, they're from the lean software development, very lean, very minimalist, and that's how it is. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe at the end?
Or yeah, sure.
Okay, going back. So in the worst case, you have like over 50 people in one room doing the planning, and also for the review would take like 2 days.
Yeah. I do not know how, I mean, you probably do highlight stories and everything, you have to figure out how you do it, but the idea is everybody's informed what the others do. Okay. It's basically like we have to, we can't all talk about it. I mean, it goes back to what I said, what are the problems? You know, you try to get one team, so the day-to-day operations, you don't want to talk with, thank you, you don't want to talk with 50 people. The day-to-day operations, you want to talk with 5 to 10 at most. However, during the planning and during the review, you need to figure out how you do this. Possibly, but this is exactly what it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say exactly how to do it. It tells you, do this. And if you do it by saying, we send 2 people into the planning from each team, and that's enough, they will represent ourselves because we're more efficient, then this is fine. They don't tell you how to do it exactly. And this is a little bit of the beauty of the less, that it gives you a little bit more flexibility. They are not so prescriptive, they're very minimalist, lean, you know, they come from the lean software development. They're the first book both of those wrote, Larman and Vodda, was called Lean Software Development, very popular book too. And you put lots of responsibility into the teams to organize and everything. And the framework really does not organize the teams itself too much. The teams need to self-organize, and they self-organize their coordination also much more. So at first, I remember that very clearly when SAFe came out and then Less came out, Ken Schwaber was firing on all cylinders against them. He says, oh, this is terrible, you can't do this, Scrum is, you know, read the Scrum guide, that's enough. Now, Scrum.org, which he's the head of that organization, basically said, okay, we do need a little bit something seemingly. To me, it reminds me a lot of Less. There is a lot of concepts that are the same. Here again, you have one PO and everything. But what you have is, you call it the exoskeleton, you know, for a scaled Scrum. Again, only for Scrum, also 9 teams, they say 3 to 9 teams, you know, instead of 8, as Less said. And you have the new role with the Nexus integration team, where you have a PO, that one PO, again, the one PO, just like you have it in Less, you have the one PO who is in that integration team, you have a Scrum Master there, and you have some members that take care that everything goes according to the agreed on processes, but also that we have releases that make sense, that at the end we can work on it, we can integrate the software and everything. And that's basically the difference to Less is this integration team that they introduced there, okay? And here it's more clear that they say representatives to the planning and retro, not everybody if need be. And they say you just send one rep and that's it. And then there's Scrum at Scale. The other guy, you know, Scrum was invented by Schwaber and Sutherland. Okay, here Sutherland had to offer something too. Sutherland goes even further. He has basically a meta framework. He says, if you need to scale, ask yourself these questions. There are 2 cycles. There's a Scrum Master cycle and the PO cycle, he calls them. And then you say, think about what you need to solve. I'm not going to tell you how to solve it. I'm going to tell you what you have to consider. What the important questions are that you ask yourself when you want to solve it. This, I think, is very attractive because if you understand agility, if you have maybe a couple of good Scrum Masters, Agile coaches in your organization, then these questions are almost like, it's more like a checklist than anything else to figure out how should I do it, what should I do with Scrum. And this is really what this is about. And finally, roll your own. That's sort of you know, what I actually like a lot, because I think there are lots of concepts that work in each of those. You need to understand that there are lots of concepts in each of these that make sense. And what I've always been proposing, and it's a little bit when I think of OM3, some of this is actually is happening there. You need to figure out what works for us from SAFe, what works for us from LESS, what from Nexus. Do we maybe want to introduce such an integration team? Do we have an overall backlog, or do we not? Who writes the stories? How many POs do we have? And so on and so on. All these things, I call them scaling patterns. And actually, I didn't use this word in here, but that's what the Scrum at Scale does too. It works with patterns, small items that you can reuse. And this is what I always suggest. Look at all of them, understand, have somebody who understands the Agile principles, mind the Agile principles. Don't forget about all these frameworks and everything, what agility in the fact is about. And make sure that you keep those Agile principles up, and then pick and choose what works well together out of the various frameworks. Okay, and I'm 5 minutes over time. Thank you. Thank you. So of course, now is a break, but if you want to have a couple of questions, go ahead. During the break.
During the break, not now.
Huh? The break is now, I thought.
The break is now. Go ahead.
So I thought the break was at 10:40, and 10:50 is the next talk. So we are starting the break now, but if you have questions, I'm here. I don't need the break.
Anybody got questions? No questions.
Yes.
With that Nexus integration team, do the teams have dailies within the teams then? Or don't they have dailies at all?
No, they have dailies, yeah.
Okay, but just the team for itself?
Mm-hmm, that's
but
right.
They don't have retros?
They have, it's like less, the team has their own retro, but they have to have an overall retrospective for the whole thing.
Okay, so there's an additional retro?
Yes, there are 2 retrospectives. But for the second one, it's not everybody goes, but only 1 per team or 2 per team or something like this.
Yeah. Also, if I remember correctly, I think there's a Nexus Day where you send off representatives from your team.
Mm-hmm.
And also the Nexus team, I believe, does not have to consist of people that are only in the Nexus team, but they kind of share
That is
resources
very, yes.
with other teams.
That is all correct. I had to go a little fast, but yes, thank you, Kazu, that's exactly right. So number 1, the integration team can be delegates, they can be made up of others, and they have a daily too to make sure that they progress with their integration and everything. It's a little bit like a Scrum of Scrums. I mean, I would call the Nexus integration team daily. It's almost like a Scrum of Scrums. Most people do Scrum of Scrums very wrong because they send the Scrum Masters to the Scrum of Scrums, which is totally bad. You need to send a delegate of each team, especially the one that needs to have the most coordination or has a problem or is impeded by some other team or so. These people you need to send to a Scrum of Scrums. And the Nexus integration team is a little bit like that, with a more stable team, not somebody else every day. Okay? Anything else?
Any more questions? All right. Next up is Daniel, the eatery on the live.
Thank you.